Welcome to the Reconciling Mission podcast, where we explore missional engagement with our local communities and a broader understanding of reconciliation. I'm Mina, your host, Network and Development Lead. I'm a priest, an author, and someone who has the privilege of leading two wonderful churches in Derby. So join me as we dive into rich conversations, biblical insights, and inspiring stories of churches and individuals finding ways to engage with our neighbours and contribute to reconciliation in our local contexts. Today we are speaking to Paul Wright and Al Barrett, and they talk about asset-based community development and kind of how we count in church and what we consider successful in a lot of ways. They bring some theology into it. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you're doing at the moment.
So my name's Paul, as you know already, and I do a whole range of stuff in the community. But street connecting is one way of describing, and probably the thing that's really relevant to this conversation.
So I've been vicar of Hodge Hill for the last 15 years, since 2010. And alongside Paul, I've also been involved in the wider community work pretty much from the beginning.
So tell us about asset-based community development. What is that, and what have you been doing?
It's a simple concept of approaching neighbourhood, approaching community with a lens of what's strong instead of what's wrong. Glass half full rather than glass half empty. I think at its most simplest, I think that's one way of describing it. I mean, the other way I talk about this was, when we think about funding bids and when funding bids make you describe your place as the worst place on earth and your place needs fixing and these, this intervention needs, and it was always felt very, very uncomfortable, but you kind of sometimes had to do it. But actually, what if a funder says, tell us the gifts, tell us the treasure, tell us the things that are good about your place, and then then tell us a bit where the things could improve and things could be better, and where there's barriers and issues and problems and and things that get in the way. But then how are you going to use the goodness and the things and the gifts that you've got? How are you going to start there to work towards making things better?
Actually, there's an abundance in our neighborhoods, an abundance of God-given gifts. And if we have any role in that, it's the role of going out with open eyes, open ears, open hands, open hearts, to discover that abundance, to point to it, to celebrate it, to receive it as gift. And in the process, God makes it more than it was already.
When I heard this way of approaching community described, I was like, that just makes sense. That's kind of when we felt at our most comfortable, when we felt at our most kind of passionate and alive. I think the most important thing is it needs to resonate on a heart level, on a head level, and for this program, a spiritual level to that.
I don't know, is there an example of a gift or a skill that you've unearthed that has been really significant, or has tell us the story? That would be brilliant.
The one that comes to mind that always makes me laugh, because, and I'll tell the story as quickly as I can. So our street connectors, which we talked about a lady called Penny, who's just an amazing person that just she's someone with a clipboard but you don't get put off. She's got an amazing talent. So she was at one of our community events outside the hub on the green, where there's a row of shops, and she was listening to people going around the not the room, the space, welcoming people and asking questions like, what do you like doing? And then she came running over to me. I was inside the hub making a drink, I think. And she said, where's Phil? Where's Phil? And I was like, I think he's outside. Phil's the guy that runs the theatre group. Because I've just found this guy that has come back to Birmingham and has been a stage manager at Butlins. And he's really up for using his skills backstage in the theatre group. So I was like, brilliant, Phil's outside, let's introduce them and introduce the two guys together. And then the next time we had the panto, the guy was stage manager. But the thing that always makes me laugh about that story is the guy only popped to the shop. He wasn't coming to the event. He didn't come with the intention of like, I'm going to get involved. He was actually popping to the shop, and then he kind of stumbled into this community event, bumped into Penny, who welcomed him, made him feel welcome, asked him some really good questions that kind of got him thinking about himself, and then made that connection to Phil, and then it went from there. So that's, I mean, for me, I love that story.
But that's a great example of kind of finding a treasure, like literally kind of unearthing a treasure, isn't it?
It's not always as quick as that story. That somebody like has one conversation and then next thing they're in a group, or they're using their gifts and skills. There's lots of longer term journeys. But yeah, it's that welcome and then asking some really good questions.
Al, what would you add to that?
I mean, from someone who wears a church hat for a lot of the time, there's so much talk about initiatives and programs and projects. And almost always there's a sense of we know where we want to get to with that. And I think one of the things that, I mean, because we live and breathe this stuff, we forget that it's sometimes a bit radical, but it's about being open to surprise. It's about saying, do you know what? We're going to actually let go of our agendas in this, or we're going to let our agendas be interrupted or disrupted. So often in church circles, we use the language of transformation as if it's what we do to other people. And actually, this stuff, as Paul said, it's about places of welcome. It's about spaces of encounter. It's about spaces where we meet each other as human beings, and the change isn't just one way. The change is two-way, and actually it changes us as Christians in our neighborhoods. And there's a flow back into church that changes the way church works as a result of our encounters with God through our neighbors in our neighborhood. And that's, that's gospel for me.
I may be wrong here, but I think this is right. It's fairly slow burn, isn't it, really? And a lot of the time, and this kind of moves me on to the next question, because it's more of a slow burn approach, and you're probably not going to see 50 people in church on Sunday because of it right now, maybe years down the line, that I think in the church today, there's an impatience for results now. And this is not what this is about, but it's going there, but not as quick as the church might want it to. So can you tell us a bit about measuring success, I suppose? Talk about that. I think that's really interesting.
Sure. So I think one that you've named, Mina, is about timescale. So this is, I've been here 15 years. Paul's been here even longer than me. This is long-term, slow, patient stuff. Another is about scale. Actually, I think really fundamental to this approach is about noticing the little things. Another is about countability, that actually this is often not about things that you can easily count. Actually, story becomes so important in this, and that's not just a kind of fluffy way of evading the kind of hard metrics. Actually, I think it's fundamental to looking at our neighborhoods, looking at mission, looking at church differently. And another probably, and I'm sure there are more, but another is that, as you pointed towards, Mina, the change that you begin to notice isn't necessarily first and foremost within the church congregation, within those circles of what we call church. Actually, it's something wider than that. And, we'd want to use kingdom of God language for that. But in a very Anglican sense, I'd also want to use parish language. Actually, I'm licensed as vicar of Hodge Hill with responsibility for the cure of souls of every single person who lives within my parish, whether they're Christian or Muslim or pagan or of no faith or whatever. Um, and that sounds very archaic and grand language in many senses, but actually what we're talking about in this stuff is about the flourishing, the coming to abundance of life, fullness of life for every single person. And I think these days I'd want to add even the kind of the more than human creation within the bounds of this patch of land.
As we've said, this is a 15-20 year journey. So if you'd written this into a 3-year plan, probably wouldn't have, perhaps wouldn't have got as far as a funder would have wanted, or a church commissioner or somebody would have wanted. But I was so struck recently in a meeting that was a church meeting that I was facilitating, and the stories of abundance and the stories of connectedness and the stories of goodness that were coming out, some of them were community stories, some of them were coming out of the church story. This was just and it's messy and it's complicated, but just that abundance that had come through trust and discovering people's gifts and passions and their hurts and their wounds and the things that they've struggled with. It's a piece of work that's happened within the church, within the congregation, within the people that regularly come and would call themselves part of the church community and the community. And then it's about when those things come together. And genuinely, when those things come together, it can be really beautiful. But all of that is based on trust and relationships. It does take time.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to people who are dipping their toe into the asset-based community development world way of thinking? What's one piece of advice that you would each give?
The challenges can also be gifts, and I think if you have that focus on gifts, it just changes the world. Looking for the gifts in people, the gifts of our community, that the church brings. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, thanks, Paul. Okay, Al, what's your piece of advice?
By patiently engaging with our neighbours over time, seeking to build community in the local neighbourhood, actually we begin to enact hope. We begin to embody hope together. And it's to go into this stuff not as a technique, not as a model, not as a strategy, but actually as a way of approaching our neighbours and neighbourhood as sacred. And in the process, we have found that there are countless moments where with a neighbour who might have no faith commitment, we're able to look together at something that's happening and point at it and say, that's holy, that's sacred, that's gospel, that's hope. And as Paul said, as we've said repeatedly in this conversation, that has a transformative effect, not just on them, the other, but on us too. Actually, this is about discovering the gospel together.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining today. And for everybody who is listening or watching at home, we'll be back with another episode that explores what the Reconciling Mission program is all about. And thank you for joining us.